This changes everything right now. McLaren, the same team that was losing nearly 1 second per lap, the same team that couldn't even start both cars in China, has just leaked a massive upgrade that could instantly erase that gap. But that's not even the biggest story. Because at the exact same moment, the FIA is preparing a rule clampdown that could directly weaken Mercedes' biggest advantage. One team gaining performance, another one potentially losing it, at the same race, in Miami. And if both things happen at the same time, this won't be a normal upgrade battle. This becomes a complete shift in power across Formula One. Because what McLaren found isn't just speed. It's a way to exploit the rules. And what Mercedes might lose is the very edge that made them dominant in the first place. It starts with something that doesn't make sense, and that's exactly why it matters. Because McLaren is not supposed to be in this position. After 3 races, the numbers were clear. Multiple retirements, a massive pace deficit, and a car that was fundamentally weaker in the most important areas of performance. At one point, they were losing close to a full second per lap to Mercedes. That's not something you fix with a small update. That's a structural problem. And everyone in the paddock saw it the same way. McLaren got the concept wrong. Too short, too aggressive, too focused on agility at the expense of downforce. Because in this generation of Formula One, the floor is everything. And McLaren built the most compact one on the grid, which means less airflow stability, less grip in slow and medium speed corners. And that's exactly where Mercedes built their advantage. Corner after corner, that's where the gap came from. So the logical expectation was simple. McLaren would have to redesign the car, maybe even abandon the concept completely. But that's not what happened. They didn't step back. They went deeper. Because instead of asking how to copy Mercedes, they asked a different question. What if the problem isn't the size of the floor, but how the air moves through it? That question changes everything. Because Formula One regulations are very strict about dimensions, but much more flexible when it comes to airflow behavior inside those dimensions. And that's where McLaren started looking. Not at what they could change externally, but at what they could reinterpret internally. And this is where the leak becomes critical. Because what's coming to Miami suggests that McLaren didn't just improve the car. They found a way to make their original concept work. A way to generate more downforce without making the car longer. A way to increase performance without breaking a single rule. And if that's true, then Mercedes is no longer competing against a slower concept. They're facing a new version of it. One that keeps the agility advantage, but removes the biggest weakness. And that's where this stops being a recovery story and starts becoming a real threat. And this is where the story stops being obvious and starts becoming dangerous. Because what McLaren found is not a traditional upgrade path. It's a reinterpretation. A way to change the outcome without changing the rules. And it all comes down to one idea. Airflow time. Not airflow volume. Not airflow speed. Time. How long the air stays controlled under the car, generating downforce before it exits. That's the hidden advantage Mercedes has mastered. A longer floor. A more stable platform. Air moving cleanly, consistently, predictably from front to rear. That's why their car works everywhere. But McLaren couldn't match that physically. Their design didn't allow it. So instead, they looked for a loophole. Not illegal. Not even controversial. Just overlooked. Because the FIA regulations define the outer dimensions of the floor very clearly. But inside the Venturi channels, where the real downforce is created, there is more freedom than most teams are willing to explore. And McLaren went all the way into that space. They reshaped the internal geometry. They adjusted how the airflow compresses, expands, and accelerates under the car. And most importantly, they increased the distance that air effectively travels, without increasing the size of the car. Which means one thing. The floor behaves like a longer floor, without being one. And suddenly, everything starts to change. Medium speed corners, where they were losing the most, become competitive. Slow corners, where traction was a weakness, start to stabilize. And over a full lap, the balance of the car shifts. Not dramatically, but enough to matter. Enough to close the gap. But here's the part that makes this even more powerful. Because this isn't just about generating more downforce. It's about controlling it. Making it predictable. Making it consistent across different speeds, different temperatures, different track conditions. And that's something McLaren didn't have before. That's what caused the instability. The inconsistency. The unpredictability. Now, that starts to disappear. And when a car becomes predictable, drivers push harder. Brake later. Carry more speed. Trust the rear. And that alone unlocks lap time that doesn't show up in simulations. But here's where the tension builds. Because while McLaren is gaining control over airflow, the FIA is starting to look closer at how other teams are using it. Especially at high speed. Especially under load. Especially in areas where flexibility becomes an advantage. And that's where Mercedes enters the picture again. Because if there's one team that has maximized every detail of airflow behavior under real racing conditions, it's them. Front wing flex. Floor stability. Aerodynamic consistency at high speed. All operating right on the edge of what's allowed. And when the FIA steps in, they don't need to ban anything. They just need to reduce how effective those systems are. Even slightly. And suddenly, the perfect balance Mercedes relies on is no longer perfect. So now, you have two movements happening at the same time. McLaren increasing the effectiveness of their floor through interpretation. Mercedes potentially losing efficiency through regulation. And when those two lines cross, that's where the real fight begins. But there's still one missing piece. Because airflow alone doesn't win races. It needs to work with something else. Something that connects every corner, every straight, every lap. Energy. And what McLaren did next might be even more important than everything you've heard so far. And this is where the entire story connects and becomes impossible to ignore. Because airflow gives you grip. But energy gives you time. Time on the straights. Time on corner exits. Time at the exact moments that decide overtakes, defense, and race pace. And for the first part of the season, this is where McLaren was still behind. Same engine as Mercedes. But not the same performance. Not the same deployment. Not the same understanding. At one point, nearly half of their deficit came from how they were using the power unit, not the power unit itself. That's a critical difference. Because it means the speed was always there. They just couldn't access it. And then, China happened. Both cars failed before the start. A complete shutdown, caused by a software incompatibility between Mercedes updates and McLaren's system. It looked like a disaster. And it was. But it also forced a decision. A turning point. Because from that moment on, McLaren stopped trusting external integration. They stopped adapting. They started controlling. Every energy map, every deployment phase, every software update, had to be validated by McLaren. Tested under their conditions. Aligned with their car. And that changes everything. Because now, the engine is no longer a shared advantage. It becomes a personalized weapon. Same hardware. Completely different behavior. And this is where it gets dangerous for Mercedes. Because while they continue with a system built for consistency, McLaren starts pushing flexibility. More aggressive deployment on corner exit. Better energy recovery into braking zones. Smarter distribution across the lap. Not just maximum power, but optimal timing. And in Formula One, timing is everything. Because it's not about how much energy you have. It's about when you use it. And suddenly, that deficit begins to disappear. From half a second, to a few tenths, to almost nothing. Now combine that with everything you've already seen. A floor that generates more downforce. Airflow that stays stable for longer. A rear wing that reduces drag more efficiently. And now, energy that is deployed exactly when the car needs it most. Corner entry becomes sharper. Mid-corner speed becomes stable. Exit traction becomes explosive. And on the straights, there is no loss. No hesitation. No wasted potential. This is no longer a car with weaknesses. This is a system. A complete, synchronized machine. And here's the part that changes the entire championship. Because if McLaren has truly aligned aerodynamics and energy at the same level, then Mercedes is no longer ahead in both areas. At best, they're equal in one, and under pressure in the other. And that's a position they haven't faced yet this season. But the real danger isn't just performance. It's what comes next. Because once a team understands how to control both airflow and energy at this level, development accelerates. Faster updates. Better correlation. More predictable gains. And suddenly, catching up becomes overtaking. And overtaking becomes leading. So now the question is no longer whether McLaren can match Mercedes. It's much more uncomfortable than that. What happens when they go beyond them? And this is where everything reaches the breaking point. Because up to now, you could still argue this is just a comeback. A team fixing mistakes. A team recovering performance. A team closing the gap. But Miami changes the nature of the story. Because this is the first real test where everything arrives at the same time. The new floor. The new airflow philosophy. The new energy system. All working together for the first time. And when a Formula One car introduces a fully integrated package, the result is never small. It's unpredictable. Because performance doesn't increase in steps. It spikes. And that's exactly what the data from the simulator is already suggesting. A gain in downforce where they were weakest, a reduction in drag where they were vulnerable, and a near elimination of their energy deployment deficit. Individually, these are improvements. Together, they are transformation. But here's where the pressure shifts. Because McLaren is not arriving in Miami quietly. They're arriving with expectation, with internal confidence, with a package they believe can fight for the front row, consistently. And at the exact same time, Mercedes is arriving under scrutiny. Not visible, not dramatic, but real. Because when the FIA starts looking closer at flexibility, teams don't get banned. They get limited. And that's much harder to manage. Because you don't lose everything. You lose just enough to feel it. A slight loss of front-end bite at high speed. A small instability under load. A fraction of efficiency that disappears when it matters most. And in Formula One, that's all it takes. So now imagine the scenario. McLaren arrives with a car that is finally complete. Balanced through every type of corner. Efficient on every straight. Predictable for both drivers. And Mercedes, still fast. But no longer perfect. No longer untouched. No longer alone. That's when the dynamic changes. Because for the first time this season, this is no longer about chasing. It's about fighting. Wheel to wheel. Strategy against strategy. Execution under pressure. And when two teams operate at the same level, the smallest detail decides everything. A better tire window. A cleaner outlap. A more precise energy deployment. Margins so small, they're almost invisible. But they decide races. And potentially, championships. But here's the final layer. The one that connects everything you've heard. Because if McLaren's interpretation works in Miami, it won't stay theirs for long. Other teams will see it, understand it, start building toward it. And the moment that happens, the entire grid begins to shift. Because the reference changes. Mercedes is no longer the model everyone follows. They become one option among many. And that's how dominance ends in Formula One. Not with a failure. Not with a mistake. But with an idea that spreads faster than any team can control. So now everything comes down to one moment. Miami. One weekend. Where a leaked upgrade and a potential FIA clampdown collide on track. And the outcome of that collision might decide who controls the rest of the season.